Hello and welcome to the Miller Lite Q&A podcast here on DK Sports Radio. I'm Matt Grubba. Alongside me today is Chris Bradford, our Penguins man. Chris, how you doing today?
Good, Matthew. How about yourself?
I'm doing quite well. Let's get right down to the questions. And first one, seeing we got our hockey guy here in the booth, we got a hockey question. What do we got on the message board for us today?
All right, this one comes from Radio Wave. Is it bad for the NHL's image if Vegas wins the Stanley Cup?
Of course, the first-year expansion team, Golden Knights. And, you know, I'll give you your time here because you've been around the Penguins and probably had some conversations because of so many former teammates on that Vegas team. But from my perspective, it doesn't hurt the NHL that much. I mean, in recent years, you've seen in other leagues, expansion teams not necessarily win it all, but I can remember in my middle school years when the Carolina Panthers, Jacksonville Jaguars made it to the NFL. Carolina, I believe it was their second year, was in the NFC Championship game.
Kerry Collins, yep.
Yeah, and Jacksonville not too far behind with that sort of juggernaut offense they had with Fred Taylor, Mark Brunell, Keenan McCardell, et cetera, and it tormented the Steelers being in the old AFC Central. Yeah, I don't think it's a huge deal. I mean, I think everybody knows that the expansion draft rules now in hindsight, you know, Vegas did have an opportunity to piece together a nice team with the rules, but they didn't know that at the time. And if Vegas doesn't choose as wisely as they did, who's to say they aren't, you know, a 500 team that barely makes the playoffs, doesn't make it. I think a lot of credit has to be given to the players on the ice.
Obviously, I've heard a lot about this in the last 24 hours or so since the Vegas Knights clinched the Western Conference Championship. They beat Winnipeg to get to the Cup final. But I understand people's putting down the Knights from a fan standpoint, where a team like Winnipeg, you've been around for 40 years, give or take. Obviously some time off there, but the Washingtons and the Torontos and these cities that have these great fan bases that haven't won. I understand people being a little resentful of the Vegas Knights getting there in the year one. But from an on-the-ice standpoint, what they have done is just incredible. I think it's the best story that I've seen in sports in a long, long time. Did they have some favorable conditions to get some good players? Yeah, a little bit compared to maybe other expansion teams. Mm-hmm. But the players that they did take, they did it with a purpose. They wanted guys with speed. They wanted guys who could score a little bit, and they wanted guys with character. Nobody could have predicted what they've done. I mean, they deserve all the credit that they've gotten, and if they win the Stanley Cup, in my mind, I think it's the best thing that would ever happen to hockey.
Yeah, and it's not the first time we've seen something like this. I mean, you have to go way back in history, and there were only 12 teams. With St. Louis Blues were an expansion team. They made it to the final.
3 years in a row.
I would have.
Although I would have to stop there and say that was different because that was back when right after the '67 expansion, where they had one conference was the original six.
Yeah, new teams and old teams.
So one of the new teams had to be in the Cup final. So it was St. Louis for those 3 years, and they lost in sweeps every year. Yeah. But they did get there.
Yeah, but then also, and I can't think of how many years they were in the league at the time, but I want to say it was only 3 or 4 with the Florida Panthers, and the Eddie Jovanovski team was. Van Beesbrook. I'm just names are popping into my head. Remembering again we're going back to clearly I was in my sports coming of age in the 90s that I remember all this stuff.
Yes, that would have been certainly people in Pittsburgh would remember. That was 1996 because that was the year the Penguins reached the conference final and they lose to John Van Beesbrook and the Florida Panthers with the rats getting thrown on the ice and all that. And that was what Tom Fitzgerald, who later became the Penguins assistant GM. He scores the game-winning goal in that Game 7. And, so the Florida Panthers, another good example of an expansion team. I believe they were in, I want to say that was maybe their second year in the league or third year, but a very young team at that point.
I feel like 93, because didn't they come in with when the Senators returned to the league? That sounds about right. But I'm sure if we're wrong, they're going to have us have our heads on a stick in the comments section.
Say, it may have been the third or fourth year. But
but yeah, I don't think that Vegas' success is going to hurt because then again, even if, let's say they go out and win it, who's to say, given the nature of the NHL, that they don't go out and miss the playoffs altogether the next year? That is the way the NHL has gone lately. When
you look at the 4 teams that were in the conference finals, 3 of them weren't in the playoffs last year.
Yeah.
And obviously Vegas didn't exist. But that's one way to look at it. And I look at it as good for hockey because, I mean, I'm a hockey fan. I grew up playing the game. If you can get more kids in Las Vegas playing the game, I think that's a great thing.
Yeah, for sure. And so we're going to go ahead and take a quick break, come back with the next segment here on the Miller Lite Q&A podcast here on DK Sports Radio.
Miller Lite is the original light beer, and we'll always brew it to have more taste, with only 96 calories and 3.2 carbs. Because we believe that if you compromise on taste, you can taste the compromise. Miller Lite. Hold true.
Great beer, great responsibility. 2018 Miller Brewing Company, Milwaukee, Wisconsin. Average analysis, 12 fluid ounces. Less than 1 gram protein, 0 grams fat.
If you're one of the thousands of Western Pennsylvanians who love to get outdoors, then you need to check out this cool new website, stepoutside.org. Learn where, when, and how you can go camping, hiking, or hunting, or take part in power sports, shooting sports, or water sports in your local community or across the country at stepoutside.org, where everything you need to know is just a click away. That's stepoutside.org.
What I want from my public accounting firm is big ideas.
But I don't want to lose the personal attention.
My company needs global capabilities.
From a firm with local ownership.
And I want to work with industry experts.
Who take the time to understand my unique challenges. And that's what sets Schneider Downs apart. Expertise for the most complex business issues. With the service you need every day. To learn how our big thinking with a personal focus can help your company, visit schneiderdowns.com.
Injured in an accident? Need assistance in preserving your business's interests? Let the attorneys at Bassey, Vreeland & Associates protect your legal rights. For over 65 years, Bassey, Vreeland & Associates has been representing the citizens and businesses of southwestern Pennsylvania. With offices strategically located in Washington and Charleroi, Bassey, Vreeland & Associates can deliver results for you throughout the Pittsburgh area. Visit www.bmvlaw.com or call 724-228-7000 to see how Bassey, Vreeland & Associates can meet your legal needs. Bassey, Vreeland & Associates. We fight, we care, we win.
All right, welcome back to the Miller Lite Q&A podcast at the DK Pittsburgh Sports Studios. Chris Bradford along with Matt Grubba, answering some subscriber questions, and I think you have another one here for us.
Yeah, we've got our next one from Tim Tomasi. He writes on the message board, which Pittsburgh pro athlete did you find to be most overrated for his play?
Oh, wow. That's a very good question, Tim. Kind of a loaded question. Don't want to get my...
Somebody's going to be mad at us no matter what we...
Somebody's going to be mad and overrated. You know, the guy I always thought was a little bit overrated and early 90s, Pittsburgh Pirates. Center fielder Andy Vance. I know he was a beloved player while he was here. Came over from St. Louis. I kind of remember him more with the Cardinals growing up, but a little bit older when he got to the Pirates. But I always thought he was just a little bit overrated. I don't know. I just didn't like him that much because I thought, Barry Bonds was by far the biggest talent in baseball at that point. Him and Ken Griffey probably, but certainly on that team it was Barry Bonds' team, and why people were giving so much love to Andy Vance, I just couldn't understand.
Yeah, it is a Pittsburgh thing that they find their favorites and really attach to them. And in the time I've lived here, I've seen it over and over. I think it's tough to say overrated for the answer I'm gonna give, but I think certainly to the tail end of his career, just because he was such a beloved figure, is Jerome Bettis.
Oh,
and I think that,
you're going to get the hate mail now.
well, no, because I'm not talking about 97 Jerome Bettis that's run over. I'm talking about the mid 2000s Bettis that so many fans were just clinging to. Oh, he's the bus, he's Pittsburgh, and they'd get upset that when certain other players would come in, whether it's Willie Parker, eventually unseated him from the starting job. And I think it's also because some of the people they tried, like Amos Zaraway was in there, they gave him a crack as the starter. Some of Deuce Staley, I think that with Pittsburghers, it was tough letting go of Bettis being the Pro Bowl type player he was. And I think that there was a romanticism that fans didn't wrap their heads around, that this isn't the same Jerome Bettis that you were cheering for. I mean, it's his style of play, the wear and tear. He wore down, and he was still a contributor in situations, but so often, it's just run the ball with Bettis. You'd hear it's like, that's not the way that offense was built, 04, 05, like when they were getting to the Super Bowl against the Seahawks.
Remember 04, it was Deuce Staley would run 98 yards and they'd give it to Bus at the 1 yard line. He'd get the touchdown and he'd get to spike the ball and all that. But yeah, certainly good answer. And actually, if it wasn't for Ben Roethlisberger's shoestring catch in that playoff game against Colts, maybe Jerome Bettis' legacy is a little bit different here, but he, of course, goes on to win the Super Bowl in his homecoming. And I think, again, you mentioned the kind of romanticizing his career.
Yeah, and don't get me wrong. I was a Steelers fan as a kid. I owned a Bettis jersey, but again, I got that in the '90s too. It's like he was certainly the face of the franchise. I would say for a good 5-year stretch at least there. But it's tough for fans. I'm not saying it's just Pittsburgh fans too. It's tough to let go sometimes. You want this guy to be in his prime forever, and that's just not the way it goes, especially in football with the physical beating those guys take.
No, and my pick, of course, Van Slyke, and he probably got traded out of town shortly in the mid-'90s when the Pirates were shedding any contract worth more than $5. So, he never really got to write much of a legacy in Pittsburgh other than those 3 years where the Pirates, of course, advanced to the playoffs. But, again, I was more of a Bonds guy, so I always thought he got short shrift, I think, here in Pittsburgh. And Van Slyke was kind of the benefactor where he got a little more love. Obviously a very good defensive center fielder, but that's what center fielder is supposed to be.
Yeah, certainly a good player. I mean, on an outstanding team, he was a major contributor. But I think part of that might have been just dislike of Bonds. People were looking for who can we gravitate to because let's be honest, Barry Bonds was
kind of a jerk
person.
Yeah, okay. I'll go
whether he was or not, again, I'm a little kid at this point. I'm not going to speak for him because I never met the guy. But that was certainly the perception.
Obviously that's the perception. And at least the way I look at it is I can kind of separate the two. I can, don't care about what the guy does, how he treats people or whatever. As long as he's performing on the field, then I can live with it. Because even if someone is a so-called good guy, especially when you get in our business, you kind of see how they are maybe away when the cameras aren't there. You kind of know who's a good guy and who's not.
Yeah. Well, I think that's going to do it here for the podcast. Thanks for everyone for listening to our Miller Lite Q&A, and that's going to be it for right now here on DK Sports Radio.